record. It's now being picked up by Gerard Fabiano. The idea is it's a Rug Delver shell that has inserted the Stoneforge Mystic package into it.
Okay. Gerard Fabiano, if we just look at his Planeswalker points, he has played more Magic than almost anyone on the planet. And I don't know what happened there. An explosion of cards. Is there a Cabal Therapy? Is there
expecting a Thoughtseize, just throws his entire hand at Harry Corvese, knows what's coming here, and it is the Thoughtseize.
That's right.
Harry down to 17 life. We see it's interesting how much Harry has done his homework here. This hand makes this deck look like a very typical Esper Deathblade hand. You see 2 swords, Stoneforge Mystic, Spell Pierce, land, Misty Rainforest, and then a Daze in it. Daze is a little...
That's a tell.
That's a bit of a tell. It's a subtle tell, whether or not Harry knows this, that Daze is not very common in Stoneblade archetypes.
Yeah, now, we know, because we have access to his deck list, that Gerard is not a simple Stoneblade or Deathblade list like many people would expect, but instead has a Delver as well as Geist and Grim Lavamancer, taking him off of those normal choices that we'd expect.
Yeah, now so in this situation, Shardless Bug is a very grindy deck. It's really just trying to out-resource his opponent. I imagine he'll be taking a Stoneforge Mystic here, and he does, as that's the one card which, you know, really, first of all, it's the only threat in Gerard's hand. It's probably the best source of card advantage that he has.
Another thing, the Pierce and the Daze, not so great when you're talking about the possibility of a Shardless agent coming into town.
Yeah, well, especially since Harry knows about them. He also knows that Gerard does not have a clock. Harry can really effectively play around cards like Daze from this position. You know, normally Daze is great because you have a quick threat down, and when your opponent tries to respond, you Daze their play. If they know you have a Daze, they can just play things a turn later a lot of the time.
See a Brainstorm. Are we going to see Gerard Spell Pierce this?
I bet we're going to see him Daze it. I think he wants to get value off that Daze while he still can. I would imagine that Daze is going to become a dead card quicker than Spell Pierce.
I could see it both ways, largely because picking up that land can be just so painful.
Right. Yeah, the land, definitely the land, there's the consideration of whether or not he wants to pick up his first land. Gerard does have both his colors. He has this and he has a Tundra. He's going to go ahead and make the Spell Pierce play.
Now, the thing about this is Harry Corvese does not have a bad memory. He knew that those cards were in there. Either way, unless Gerard used the Daze, he knew that he'd be able to follow up and get that one of the counter spells out of there. And if there was an island that was non-basic, follow up. He had that Wasteland in hand. That was not an accidental Brainstorm.
Yeah, so we see Gerard now trading a Wasteland back with Harry. In this situation, Gerard, remember, he has a lot of removal, but he doesn't actually have a threat yet. So Wasteland, you know, by trying to mana deny Harry, that's the best way he can present a threat right now, while he waits to draw an actual relevant card.
Swords to Plowshares ×2 in Gerard's hand currently.
And Gerard draws another Wasteland, this time taking Harry off all lands. Interestingly, in this matchup, I thought that Harry decided to crack a Wasteland when he did. The lands seem to be really more important for Harry in this situation than they are for Gerard.
Yeah, I agree. One of the things I was thinking about, he might not recognize what Gerard is, that he might think of Gerard as some sort of blade deck, like a Stoneblade deck, and he is a blade deck, but he's also a Delver deck, and Delver decks, just generally speaking, are more than happy to have a lower mana count happening.
Delver decks really don't need a lot of lands to operate, where Shardless Bug probably wants about 3 lands, maybe even 4 at the end of the game.
Yeah, I mean, just in general, I would expect the land to be far more valuable for a deck that is going to be casting Ancestral Vision.
Yeah, so in addition to that, we see Gerard, he's been land flooded this game, so he actually has 3 lands, a 4th in hand. He's still looking for that first threat, however, to start going at Harry's life total with.
4 mana after all of those Wastelands.
Yeah, and this is one of those situations that, you know, the land screw versus land flood dilemma. Usually the land screw player ends up coming out on top in these. That said, though, here he's at 8 cards now.
A discard happening here. Jace, ouch.
Yeah, that was his draw for the turn, so Harry really not going to make any progress until he hits another land.
One thing to think about, too, Gerard Fabiano is a Stifle deck as well.
Right, so Harry now has drawn Ancestral Vision. The question is if he's going to... Yep, he's going to try, and there you see the Stifle. Harry now left with absolutely no lands. He's going to go ahead and try to force of will that Stifle.
Are we going to see... Yep, a daze there, cast
And
for the
just-
alternate cost.
Just brutal for Harry. So the Force of Will's countered, he loses his second Jace, and he loses his land. No permanence in play at the moment. Once again, no threats for Fabiano.
Harry Corvese fetches one more time. Do you have yet another stifle?
All right, and I think the jig's up a little bit. When you see the dazes and the stifles, you know, part of it, and all these wastelands, part of you is going to click and be like, hey, wait a second. This is what a Delver deck does. This isn't how a Stoneblade deck plays.
We see a tropical island. In his hand, Harry has an Ancestral Vision. Given how there is no clock, Vision seems like a very awesome card to suspend.
Yeah, it's unlikely that Gerard's going to be able to win the game before this comes offline, even if Gerard, say, gets a Delver and flips it on his very next turn, which,
There's a
alright,
Delver.
That's the first half.
Remember, sword, still hanging out in Gerard's hand.
Right, Sword's really good in this matchup. Remember that this matchup is about grinding more than anything else. So with Charlotte's Bug, despite the fact that Fabiano has all these swords in his hand, Harry's going to just try to play threats, and he's really content playing a one-for-one game with Fabiano.
An exciting thing, Stifle, a excellent possible counter to the triggered ability of the Suspend, making it so you can permanently exile an Ancestral Vision if you do it right.
Right, so there is a trigger when you suspend a card on the last one that says, if you remove the last suspend counter, you may play this spell without paying its mana cost. That is a stifleable trigger, and when you stifle it, then the spell permanently remains exiled.
Brainstorming the main phase for Harry, we find not only another land, but a fetch land, so he can get rid of some cards he doesn't want right now, lay a fetch land, and be able to shuffle those away. Now that's assuming, of course, that his fetch is not stifled.
Yeah, and if I'm in Harry, I'm pretty much under the assumption that this fetch land will be stifled.
Well, I mean, there's only so many stifles, and stifling an Ancestral Vision is also a thing.
Right, so Gerard will have to decide whether he wants to take away Harry's second land or take away the 4 cards that Harry will get in a couple of turns. My inclination would be to say that Gerard's going to go ahead and try to stay very aggressive here.
In for 3.
Now he has Corvese down to 8, that's a 3-turn clock, and actually a smaller one as Fabiano has drawn a Lightning Bolt. He's closing out the number of turns in this game somewhat rapidly now.
Ponder from Gerard Fabiano. Gerard Fabiano, a New York area player, lived in Jersey. I believe he still lives in Jersey.
And so having a little bit of a home advantage, you'd be saying. Not having to travel too far for this one. He now has 5 lands in play, and I think if you count the lands he's wastelanded or play his own wastelands, that's 8 lands now for this Delver deck. That 8 is, he only has 22 lands in the entire deck, I believe.
And we see a fetch from Corvese.
Even
And
19
lands.
So it's almost half.
Stifle. Gerard pushed to the choice. Is it going to be on this land, or is it going to be on the Vision later? You know what? You can have a whole ton of cards, but if you can't cast them...
Right, and I think what Gerard Fabiano maybe just be trying to end the game before that Ancestral Visions ever comes out to play. He does have 3 damage off the Insectile Aberration, 3 more off the Lightning Bolt in his hand. While it's not lethal, it will drop Harry to 1, which means Harry won't even be able to crack a fetch land if he draws it.
Gerard, 2 more lands in play. There can't be very many more lands left in his deck. He only has 3 Volcanic Island and 4 Tundra for colored sources of actual factual mana.
Right, so with one of them being wastelanded, he actually now has 1 land left in his deck.
And we see a Vendilion Click at the end of the turn, the only Vendilion Click in Gerard's deck, and that card is going to show Gerard's swords to Harry, get an extra card deeper, and then he's like, gotcha, you know what, you're gonna be dead.
Yeah, so we really saw that, that trading of resources that game. 2 wastelands from Gerard, 1 wasteland from Harry, traded 3 lands. Then Gerard was able to stifle 2 more lands. So Harry was kept off 5 lands at the end of that game. 2 of his own doing, but 3 of them coming from the Delver player.
I think you brought up a really good point about the question of whether or not Harry actually wanted to be wastelanding there. And I imagine Harry looked at his hand and thought to himself, I've got a good mana base here. I'm going to wasteland him, and maybe Gerard is just going to be stuck.
Well, what I think, and you have to remember the timing of it, is that very first wasteland came from Harry when Gerard only had one land in play. So at that point you're thinking, maybe my opponent has kept a land light hand. I have plenty more lands. This is a good play to make. You can, you know, always mize that wasteland to hope to just kind of knock someone off their mana.
Well, he had thought seized and had seen a total of 2 mana total. One of them put into play, you know, get rid of it, and maybe Gerard only has that one left.
Right. One thing I remember when I first played Shardless Bug, I talked to Jerry Thompson, you know, one of the chief creators of Shardless Bug, about this deck. Shardless Bug actually only plays 2 wastelands, and one of the first tips I was given is he said, these wastelands are not for mana screwing your opponent, they're for killing lands you need to deal with. You know, a lot of times we'll see things like, in a Jund matchup, the Shardless Bug player has to save these wastelands for things like Grove of the Burnwillers. In this matchup, Gerard Fabiano doesn't have any utility lands, but I think the point Jerry's making is that lands are just so important in the Shardless Bug deck that you typically do not crack your wastelands.
I mean, I feel like I had a similar lesson at the SCG event in Columbus during Origins last year where I was playing, and I used a wasteland on an opponent, and at the end of that turn, I realized, at the end of their next turn, that I had made a terrible mistake.
And what you were piloting also the Shardless Bug deck?
I was playing something similar, but not in terms of needing mana. In terms of needing mana.
So there's just always that consideration with wastelands?
And I thought, you know what? They've got less mana than me, I'm ahead, and it just mattered that the opponent that I had only needed 1 or 2 mana to function. I needed more. And you know what? Gerard Fabiano, he had, what, a Delver? The Delver did all that work, and then finally, way later in the game, after flooding it out, sure, he was doing stuff, but the extra 1 mana for Harry was way more important than the extra 1 mana for Gerard.
Well, one of the reasons that Wasteland is so good is because of how good it is in the Delver deck. Delver is probably the deck that uses Wastelands the best of any of the decks in Legacy because it's so brutally efficient with its threats and attacks its opponent's mana and resources so hard that if you're used to playing Delver, you're used to just playing Wastelands, hitting your opponent, knocking them back. In this situation though, remember Bug is a grinding deck. It always draws more cards. It always has uses for more of its lands. It's why it's only playing 2 Wastelands. It's playing them because it wants a way to deal with lands, but not really because it wants to get into a resource fight at all.
Well, you remember when that Ancestral Vision was ticking down, if you draw 3 cards, and then as you said, 4 cards because of that draw phase on your turn, if you draw 4 cards, that extra Wasteland might be half of a spell that you can cast. And like, that is a huge deal, and why maybe that moment might be a thing that if we were to revisit, we might go the other direction.
Right.
And now we're not just saying this because hindsight is 2020 and Gerard had land, 2 of them being wastelands and a flood.
It is unfortunate that after Harry uses the first wasteland, then Gerard pulls out 2 wastelands of his own.
Yeah, and you know, one thing to be aware of too, both of these players 7-0, so it's not like Harry has been some kind of slouch today. No, he's gone through 7 rounds of Legacy. A lot of Legacy tournaments would already be in a top 8 by now, but no, 528 players this round and 2 more rounds after to go. Harry, I mean, I think he's been showing himself having a good day today.
And he had a good reason for wastelanding too. When he thought seized, you're right, he only saw 2 lands in Gerard's hand, no wastelands. Both those wastelands from Gerard that he played back-to-back were top decks. So it's just kind of a confluence of unfortunate situations for Harry that led to him eventually getting stuck with no permanence in play.
I mean, I think the only clue, unless he has seen Gerard play today, the only clue that maybe it was the wrong way to go was the days that might signal that Gerard was not a simple, Esper Deathblade or, other kind of, blade normal deck that might function on 2 to 5 mana.
You can't imagine, because as it turned out, the first 3 draws for Gerard were Stifle, Wasteland, Wasteland. It's hard always to see that angle of attack coming, especially when the opening hand looks so much like a different deck.
Okay. Harry on the play here.
Looks like he has a somewhat land-heavy hand. We know he has a Verdant Catacombs, a Wasteland, and I believe a Tarmogoyf.
Okay. Fetch while he can.
Yep, it's going to be the choice between a sea and a bayou. He goes ahead and grabs a bayou. Or I suppose a tropical island. He has all three options here.
Harry, in case you're wondering, much like Gerard, has no land that he can fetch that's a basic land.
And none of these players playing any basics.
We see once again a turn 1 Thoughtseize.
And Gerard's hand, what I would say is very good for a Delver Blade deck. It is a Scalding Tarn, a Wasteland, a Volcanic Island, so 3 lands. On top of that, a Geist of St. Traft, a curve of Delver of Secrets into Stoneforge Mystic, into Geist of St. Traft, and to top it all off, a Submerge, which can be played at any time.
Submerge is just such a sick card.
Right. Yeah, Submerge basically coming in any matchup where your opponent's playing Tarmogoyfs. Figures to be pretty good here. This is a very tempo-oriented hand for Gerard. It has a 1-drop, it has a 2-drop, it has a 3-drop, it has a Wasteland, and it has that Submerge we were talking about, as you can see on the left.
During Mercadian Masks, this whole free mechanic of if you've got a thing and I've got its enemy, the card is free. Very, very powerful.
Yeah, we saw a couple of cards like that. We also saw yesterday in Legacy, we saw Jeff Howland playing Massacre, which is another card which does a similar thing. So the Wasteland from Gerard means that both players are left without lands again. So Harry's going to have to be careful that he doesn't get resourced out of the game. Though I think he's a little bit safer this time around. He knows that Gerard doesn't have a Stifle. Or he knows that it's unlikely Gerard has a Stifle.
Only 22 lands in Harry's deck. This is a common thing. Normally, a lot of these decks that are our blue-based decks in any other format would have a heck of a lot more land, but Brainstorm certainly changes the equation, not to mention Baleful Strix, Deathrite Shaman, and Ancestral Vision.
Yeah, so Deathrite Shaman, as you kind of were pointing out, is a mana source. He has a lot of cantrips in the deck. Even though the deck only has 22 lands, it functions like it has so much more.
One land each. Another land in Harry's hand. I think I see a Tarmogoyf. Yep, there it is.
Alright, so neither player, because of that Thoughtseize, Harry was able to take away Gerard's turn 1 play, which really slows down that Delver deck. Remember, Delver plays a lot better from ahead than it does from behind. So one of the things Harry's going to try to do is to not really let Gerard get ahead. And cards like Tarmogoyf, or in this case Thoughtseize, will really help him do that.
A Stoneforge, a Strangle, or a Geist of St. Traft, a Submerge, all in Gerard's hand.
Yeah, it looks like Gerard, he cracks his Scalding Tarn. Presumably he's either going to try to Spell Pierce this Thoughtseize or Brainstorm to hide his good cards from the Thoughtseize. Harry, though, is going to take this opportunity of a fetch land in the graveyard, no lands in play, to crack his own fetch so that he gets around Stifle.
I think the pointing out we see there is just making sure the life total is correct.
Right. So Harry will get a Tropical Island, puts all his colors online.
Gerard finishes his fetch.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, so I imagine it's either Spell Pierce or Brainstorm, we'll see. Neither of which were in Gerard's opener, so it'll be a recent draw.
Okay, we're gonna see.
And
Brainstorm.
Right, so Brainstorm, not only one of the better card drawers in the format, remember it has that second piece of utility where it does this against an opposing Thoughtseize.
And Gerard putting 2 cards back, protecting them from this discard spell.
Yeah, it looks like he's leaning toward hiding a Stoneforge Mystic, and then another card. We're not able to see that one yet. Remember, last time we already know, and Harry knows, that this hand has a Submerge, a Geist of St. Traft, and a Stoneforge Mystic in it. I think Gerard looks like he will show him the same cards again.
We see Submerge, Stoneforge Mystic, Bolt, Ponder, Geist, and a Volcanic.
Yeah, now a little bit of a mini game going on here. As you recall, Gerard put a second Stoneforge Mystic on top of his deck. I think the obvious take, if you're Harry Corvese here, is to take the Stoneforge Mystic to try to stop Gerard from making a turn 2 play, though that actually plays right into Gerard's strategy.
What will Harry take here?
Yeah, I could imagine that Harry, like the straightforward play is to take the Stoneforge Mystic as it's going to come down next turn. Harry may also try to take the Geist of St. Traft if he just doesn't have an answer for it. That's a card that once it hits the table is pretty difficult for Charlotte's Bug to answer.
And Harry goes with the thing that you originally suggested, getting the Stoneforge Mystic a little more concerned about what Gerard can produce immediately, hoping to be able to answer the next card before that comes down.
But as we see, Gerard right off the top. How lucky! Another Stoneforge Mystic.
It's like he crazily top decked that, but we know he hit it. He hit it there with his brainstorm.
So what I really like about that play from Gerard is he was so confident that that was going to happen that the second card he put down, I believe, is just a card he didn't want in his hand. So you know how brainstorm is better with the shuffle. We knew that once he resolved this, a shuffle would be coming, and he actually has managed to shuffle away a card in his hand in addition to getting the Stoneforge Mystic.
Batterskull fetched out by the Stoneforge Mystic. Batterskull, a card that when it was printed, a lot of the whole Magic playing tournament world went, what? Really?
Yeah. Batterskull certainly the best living weapon printed at the time. I know they really wanted to have a piece of equipment that really showcased the living weapon mechanic. Batterskull above and beyond in that duty. And Harry's going to go for the Mana Denial Wasteland again. This time he hits Gerard's Tundra after making a Tarmogoyf.
Now he knows that because Gerard top-decked that Stoneforge Mystic, that there was no land top-decked, no other land in Gerard's hand. A much more reasonable way to perhaps choke Gerard out of mana.
Yeah, no, I don't believe Gerard's missed a land drop yet.
When he got Thoughtseize, there were no lands left.
Okay, so Gerard's going to probably have to ponder here to try to find the land. With that said, though, it's still, it's unclear as to whether or not that Wasteland was more or less valuable than the Tundra from Gerard. It depends really on whether or not he hits a land.
Gerard using a ponder. We see a Grim Lavamancer amongst the crowd of cards in Gerard's current hand.
Yeah, it looks like that one's been added with the most recent draw. Gerard's going to keep 3 on top, draw, and he has a Volcanic Isle Major, but it's not a fetch land. So he's going to have to draw those remaining 2 non-land cards.
He submerges for free. He does have an island. Harry does have a forest. Attacks for 1 and lays a Grim Lavamancer.
Right, so actually, in all this fetch landing and thought seizing that Harry's been doing, he's dropped himself down to 13 life. The target on him, the life total target, actually a lot smaller than what you'd expect in this situation. He's already down to 12.
The Grim Lavamancer sitting out there. Classic art on the Grim Lavamancer. It could just take several turns here and go, shoot you, shoot you, shoot you.
Right, and in addition to that, because most of the different kinds of permanents are in Gerard's graveyard, he can use the Grim Lavamancer to shrink Harry Corvese's Tarmogoyf.
Remember, Gerard also has Lightning Bolt in hand.
Yeah, I believe Gerard's the only player with an instant, so we can go ahead and take care of that. Yeah, so in addition to the Lightning Bolt, he has Harry at actually a fairly low life total right now.
And now he wants to see just what's in the graveyard for Harry. He can use the Grim Lavamancer, if he's lucky, to be able to manage that Tarmogoyf, just like you said, but it really does depend. What does Harry have there?
So no third land for Gerard, but he does have a Delver of Secrets. Presumably, when he ponders, he doesn't know any of the other cards, I believe, right now.
Right now, he's starting to see new cards beginning this next turn.
Right, so he's hoping to flip that Delver. Remember,
Oof.
And maybe it will not matter as Baleful Strix is added to the battlefield.
Baleful Strix, awesome card. A little bird for 2 mana. It's an artifact. It's a bird. You draw a card. It's got flying. It's got Death Touch.
And so Gerard's going to have to make an interesting choice here. He can either go on the plan where he Grim Lavamancers right at the face to start going at Corvese's life total. He can also Grim Lavamancer to take care of the Baleful Strix to hope that if his Delver flips, it opens the way for that extra 1 damage in Insectile Aberration.
I think if I were in Gerard's shoes, I would consider shooting the face for now and deciding on the bird after the Delver flips or not. There's a lot of fuel for that Grim Lavamancer.
I think turns in the past, I believe that Gerard is tanking on this one. His deck probably is around a third, a little higher than a third to flip the Delver without any manipulation.
Now with this attack with the Tarmogoyf,
that swings in for 4, and then we'll see
another Ancestral Vision suspended. Yeah, with the attack of the Tarmogoyf, now the Stoneforge Mystic can get on in there as well.
Right, and of note, because he now has placed a creature and an artifact in the graveyard, he has upped the size significantly on that Tarmogoyf.
Is that 2 brainstorms removed?
Yep, 2 Brainstorm and Submerge, I believe.
Oh,
I think
okay.
he's trying to get the instants gone. So right now they have Sorcery, Creature, Land, and Artifact, but because he's removed all the instants, the Tarmogoyf is still a 4/5.
We have the untap. Let's see what the Delver sees. I know the secrets.
Oh my, and I could not think of a better card to flip off that Delver than
Wow.
Lightning Bolt. So he has a swing of 5, and then a burn for 2 right now. He's actually going to go ahead and swing for 5. Oh, he's going to go right
Bolt,
for the kill.
bolt.
Swing for 5, burn for 6.
Bolt you. Bolt you. That's it.
All right.
that a
And the
Notion
final card,
Thief?
That is a Notion Thief that Harry Corvese is putting out.
Gerard.
Yeah.
You got my notions there. Oh, man. That would have been amazing on that on a brainstorm earlier in the game.
Yeah, Notion Thief, a card out of Dragon's Maze that really is one of those gotcha sort of cards. We've seen a couple amazing plays with it in Legacy. Every time you can nab a brainstorm, back-breakingly good.
I was watching Justin, I believe, Uppel, and it was me and Osip sitting commentating when we saw the Notion Thief yoink away a Jace. Justin, the famous recipient of that, there's some amazing images of that image. I mean, of that moment. You should check it out if you get a chance.
You have the